Hi, everybody. Welcome to the aggression chapter. So, we need to talk about aggression. And in order to do that, we need to first define what is aggression. So, aggression is an intentional behavior that is aimed at doing harm to another person. Excuse me. If you want to do harm or cause pain to another person, that is what we're talking about when we're talking about aggression. Now, when we say aggression, this does not necessarily have to be physical aggression. Of course, violence does include aggression, but it can be other kinds of aggression as well. Anytime that you are intentionally trying to harm someone, that counts as aggression. So aggression is not the same as assertiveness. So often in general, we're just like, oh, aggressively go after your goal, right? That's not what we're talking about here. When we say aggression, you're trying to hurt somebody. That's what's going on. So if you're aggressively going after a goal, that's not bad. That's good, right? So if you're being aggressive in a sales pitch, for example, then that's not aggression that we're talking about. Aggression has to be when you're trying to harm someone. So aggression in social psychology, you're trying to hurt somebody. You want them to be hurt. Okay, now we need to talk about the difference between hostile aggression and instrumental aggression. So hostile or emotional aggression is when you are aggressive based off of, generally based off feelings of anger, and you want to harm that person. You want that person to be in pain. So the goal of hostile aggression is that person should be in pain. Does that make sense? Versus instrumental aggression, which is aggression that happens because you want some other goal and that person gets hurt in the way. So, for example, if if we're talking about me getting in a fight and I'm angry with you and then I beat you because I want you to be in pain, that would be hostile aggression. But if my intention, if we meet on the street and I want to steal your wallet, right, and I hit you in the process of stealing your wallet, then my goal is not for you to be in pain. My goal is to get your wallet. And so instrumental aggression is when we use harm in order to get something else, right? There's a different kind of goal, except you're not trying to make that person be in pain. You're trying for something else instead. So, for example, most people would say that something like playing football would be instrumental aggression, right? The intent is not to harm someone. The intent is to get the football into the end zone, that kind of a thing. All right. So let's go ahead and ask you several questions. Have you committed any acts of violence within the last week? Now, I'm talking about violence here. This is talking about physical violence against somebody. And I'm not saying that you had to have killed somebody. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, have you used an act of violence where you intentionally tried to harm somebody else physically? Okay, let's go to the next one. Have you experienced violence where somebody else was violent towards you, like physically violent towards you? Now, it doesn't have to be extreme. It can be a small amount of violence, but have you experienced it? All right. Have you committed some other form of aggression within the last week? Nonviolent aggression, right? Where you're trying to harm someone, but it wasn't in a physically violent way. And have you experienced some other form of aggression within the last week? Not violence, but other form of aggression. All right, now your answers to these questions may vary based on a lot of things, but one thing that is often the case is gender. So it turns out that males tend to be more likely to experience and be a part of violence compared to women. However, there's some other factors that are involved. One thing that you should note is that when we're talking about violence, we're not talking about like just punching somebody, but slapping counts, pushing counts, throwing something like a glass of wine in somebody's face, that would be aggression. That would be not only aggression, that would be violence, right? And trying to harm that person. So those are forms of aggression. And remember, we talked about instrumental versus hostile, but they can be direct or indirect. So direct is something where you directly try and harm that person. So for example, if you hit somebody, that is obviously very direct aggression. But indirect can be you try to harm someone without intent, without directly going to that person. So If you talk about somebody behind their back, you are indirectly being aggressive. So you want to hurt me, so you talk bad about me to my wife, for example. That would be indirect, and it's often relational in that case because of the indirection. Now, gender differences. We mentioned this before. It does seem that women are more likely to use indirect aggressive tactics, and men are more likely to use direct and violent tactics, and be experience violence as well. So, is that because of gender strategies, or is it some sort of chemical thing? Well, chemical. Let's talk about this. Testosterone is related to aggression. That is true. And levels of testosterone are related. They're at least correlated with levels of aggression. But strategies also get involved here when we're talking about cultural strategies. So there is a theory that historically women have been less able to effect change in the culture, so they have had to resort to more indirect means of getting what they want. So what that means is, if you think about like in the 1800s, women didn't own property generally and had to do things with permission of their husbands. So if they wanted to effect some sort of change or behavior, they often had to do that in an indirect way. They couldn't like negotiate with money or something. They would have to do things indirectly or relationally. So that would indicate that there was a social or cultural strategy that women would have taken because of their position in society. There have been some of these same strategies have carried on, even though we are more equal, at least more equal than we used to be in our society, but women tend to use less direct means of negotiation and uses of power than men do overall. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to play a game now. We're going to play a game. You're going to play with me, all right? We're going to play the X's and O game. And in order to do this, the first thing that we need to do is you need to tell me what is the last digit of your phone number. All right, you told me the last digit of your phone number is even, so let me tell you how we're going to play this game. So what's going to happen is this is how this goes. We're going to play 5 times, and if you're going to choose an X or an O that you're going to give me, all right? You're going to choose an X or an O that you're going to give me. And I'm going to give you an X or an O. So the way this goes is, if we both give O's, then we both get 10 points. If we both give X's, we get negative 10 points. But if I give an X and you give an O, then you get 0 points and I get 15 points. So if we both give O's, we both get 10. If I give an X but you give an O, I get 15 and you get 0. But if we both give X's, we both get negative 10. All right? So let's go ahead and play this game. Choose what you're going to give me. You gave me an X. I'm going to give you an X. You gave me an O. I'm going to give you an X. All right. You told me that your last digit of your phone number is odd. So let me explain how we're going to play this game. This is the X and the O game. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to give each other either an X or an O. So what you're going to choose is you're going to choose whether you're going to give me an X or you're going to give me an O. Here's how this works. If we both give each other an O, then we both get 10 points. However, if I give you an X, but you give me an O, I get 15 points. And vice versa, right? If I give you an O and you give me an X, then you get 15 points and I get 0 points. So if one person gives the X, the other person gives the O, the person who gave the X gets 15, the other person gives 0. If we both give X, then we both get negative 10 points. Now, the way this is going to work is you're going to choose what you're going to give me, but I'm going to flip this coin. So there's one of my kids play coins, right? So I'm going to flip, and heads is going to be an X, and this is 10. That's the tails. That's going to be an O, okay? So go ahead and choose. And I'm going to flip. I flip the coin, and I give you an X. I flip the coin, and it's an X. I flip the coin, and oh, you can't see it, it's an X. I flip the coin, and it's an X. I flip the coin, and it's an X. All right. So we played that game, and we're going to tally up the points that we got. Okay. Now that you've played that game, here's what I want you to do. Imagine that we have in front of us a bowl of ice water. Okay? A bowl of ice water. And you get to decide how long I should put my hand in the ice water. Okay? You get to decide how long I should put my hand in the ice water in seconds. All right? So you can tell me which one it is, how long I should put the hand in my hand in the ice water and keep it there. All right. Okay, now here's what we're gonna do. This is a bowl. Let's see if you can see it. Oh, let's hope it works. Shouldn't have used the screen. This is ice water. Let's see if I can put something behind it so you can see it better. Oh, there it goes. Can you see it? Maybe if I put it down. All right. Anyway, you can kind of hear it rattling at least. All right. This is a bowl of ice water. So let's do this. Okay, next, here's what we're going to do. This is a bowl of ice water. Now, I know it's hard for you to see that with the way this keying works, but you can at least hear the ice rattling around. All right. So this is a bowl of ice water. And here's what we're going to do. You get to choose how long I'm going to stick my hand into this ice water and keep it in there. So you choose. All right, you chose 1 second. So here I go. 1/1000. All right. Okay, you chose 5 seconds. So here I go. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 5, 1,000. Woo! All right. All right, you chose 10 seconds. So here I go. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 8, 1,000, 9, 1,000, 10, 1,000. Ah! Oh, all right. Okay. You chose 15 seconds. All right, so here we go. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 8, 1,000, 9, 1,000, 10, 1,000, 11, 1,000, 13, 1,000, 14, 1,000, 15, 1,000. Ah! All right, that was cold. Woo! So I really did do that. I really did stick my hand in that ice for the amount of time that you told me. So there's a reason why we're doing this, and it does have to do with what we're discussing today. All right, so there's a couple things you should know. When we play that game, I had you either tell me that your last digit of your phone number was odd or even. So the even group, what I did is every time you told me what you were gonna choose, I chose an X, and I chose it. With the odd group, though, I flipped this coin, so it was random. Well, in reality, it wasn't random. It seemed random. I actually gave you an X every time. In fact, in both instances, I gave you an X every time. The only difference was, for some of you, it seemed intentional, and for the others, it seemed unintentional. By flipping a coin, it was unintentional for that I was intending to harm you. The ice water is a common way that we measure aggression. If you stick somebody's hand in ice water for a certain amount of time, it's not going to permanently harden them, right? It's not going to cause permanent damage, but it is going to cause discomfort, right? So I'm okay. We're all right. But that is a common way that we use as a measure of aggression in social psychology by saying how long somebody should keep their hand in a bucket of ice water. So what we're going for here is the idea of Betancourt et al. When they said that provocation leads to retaliation, but it depends on whether it was intentional. So for example, in this particular case, if I provoked you, right? I gave you X's so that you would get fewer points, right? That was a provocation to you. I expect that if you were in the group, though, where that provocation was happening due to a random coin, as opposed to my choice, that you actually would have kept my hand in the ice water for less time. But if it was clear that I was choosing to give you an X, then I expect that you would have had me put my hand in the ice water for a longer period of time. This is saying that when you provoke somebody, we want to retaliate, and that is the aggression. In this particular case, the retaliation was how long I had to keep my hand in the ice water, and that would have depended on whether or not I intentionally was provoking you or if I was unintentionally provoking you. When we measure aggression, it's a little hard nowadays in actual, we're trying to do ethical studies, right? So it's hard to do things like, go punch somebody. We're not going to do that. So how do we measure aggression? Well, some ways that are commonly done are things like the cold pressure test. So having a bucket of ice water, which is what this is, a bucket of ice water, and determining how long somebody sticks their hand in that ice water would be a measure of aggression. All right, it's not going to cause permanent harm, and that's how long it would be, right? Another way, this is hot sauce allocation, right? You provoke somebody and then you say, okay, here you guys are going to both eat tacos, but you get to determine how much hot sauce goes on the other person's taco. That's one way that it's been done. A white noise blast is how loud do you think we should blast this other person with noise? And then you get to determine how loud it's going to be. Now, obviously, these are not as real life, right? They have less external validity as compared to, hitting, punching, stabbing, that kind of thing, somebody else. But they are measures of aggression that we have used in experiments in a lab. right? Because there's, only so much we can do to be ethical in our experiments in labs. So let's ask you this. Does playing violent video games cause violence? Well, and the other thing I need to ask you is, do you play violent video games regularly? So I do expect that you're less likely to tell me that playing violent video games causes violence if you play violent video games. But what we do know is this, is that there have been several meta-analyses, and we certainly know that there is a correlation. It is clear that there is a correlation between aggressive video games and aggression, meaning in this case, physical aggression. Now, does that mean that something causes it? Remember, we talked about correlational versus experimental designs. Well, correlational designs mean that you measure one thing, like how much you play violent video games, and you measure another, like how aggressive you act. An experiment is you actually manipulate the independent variable. You manipulate how violent the video game is that they play, and then you measure aggression. There's a lot fewer studies that are looking at experiments, but certainly there's a correlation between violent video games and violence. Now, that could be because of other things, though, like culture or other things like that. There does seem to be some evidence, though, that it's a little bit related, but it's hard to actually show this in an experiment because, remember, it's hard to measure things in a lab, right, to get real measures of aggression. One such study found that kids who played a violent video game were more likely to be violent afterwards if they played hockey, right, where they did randomly assign them to play a violent video and a non-violent video game. But it's hard to show the causality there because it was just a one-time thing and it's not over a long period of time. Certainly, though, they do seem to be correlated. What about other things that determine aggression? So one is heat. We know that correlationally, at least, there are more violent crimes like murder and rape when it is hotter outside. So when it's spring and summer, there are more violent crimes. Now, one problem with this is that this might not be because of the heat itself. It might be because of the fact that people tend to be more outside and tend to interact more if that's the case, right? It could also be an idea of misattribution of arousal. It could be that the discomfort, the arousal from being hot, leads to somebody feeling like they're angry, and therefore they act aggressively. So that is a possibility. We're not sure because this is a correlational situation. We also know that the cultures are correlated with different kinds of aggression. So this depends on your attitude towards different types of violence. Okay, so for example, there have been studies of like a culture of honor. So at least historically, a few decades ago, the South of the United States was considered a culture of honor, where you would try to maintain your good name, your honor. And what they found is that people who come from that kind of culture, when they were provoked, were more likely to act aggressively to someone else, based off the culture that they lived in. So we need to talk about frustration. Now, when we talk about frustration, we're talking about the frustration-aggression hypothesis. The frustration-aggression hypothesis originally states that when you experience frustration, which we're defining as the perception that that's supposed to say one is being prevented from attaining a goal, then you're going to be aggressive. So let's say that you feel like I am frustrating you from your goal of getting a good grade, right? Well, the frustration-aggression hypothesis would say that frustration should lead to aggression towards me. They would say specifically that all aggression is caused by some sort of frustration, that some goal is being impeded by someone else, and that would lead towards aggression towards that person. Therefore, frustration directly leads to aggression. Well, this was revised later on. There was a revised frustration-aggression hypothesis, which states that actually frustration leads to negative emotions, and those negative emotions may lead to aggression. What they're saying in this particular case is that frustration doesn't always lead directly to aggression, but the frustration can lead to negative emotions, and those negative emotions then can lead to aggression. What they're saying is that it's not just the frustration by itself that leads to the aggression, but to a negative emotion has to be experienced first, and that is what leads someone to aggression. So the revised part is that the frustration aggression hypothesis is now mediated. There's something in the middle. That's what the mediated means. There's mediated by negative emotions. So why do people aggress? Well, we talked about the frustration aggression hypothesis. So if people feel ideas of relative deprivation, then they tend to be more aggressive. So relative deprivation includes the idea that I can see what's going around me, and I'm frustrated because of being deprived relative to other people. So some people, for example, have hypothesized or theorized that race riots often come from relative deprivation, meaning that people of a certain group, in this case, a certain race, can see that they have less than other people, perhaps someone of a different race. And that leads, they see that relative deprivation. That frustration of them not being able to get the goal, that them not having justice, them not having what they want, leads to the negative emotions, which then lead to aggression in the form of, for example, a riot. Other people say that this is based off of ideas of social learning. Now, it doesn't have to be one or the other, but social learning is that we watch other people and learn how to act. So, for example, when we talked about that idea of a culture of honor, the aggression might happen because you have learned by watching, by observing other people, that you are supposed to act in an aggressive way in a certain time. One of the most famous studies of this is the Bobo doll study. So the Bobo doll study is when they had a video. So little kids watched a video of an adult, and the adult either acted kindly or aggressively towards a Bobo doll. Now the Bobo doll is this little inflatable, the inflatable punching bag thing, right? So the kids had never played with this inflatable Bobo doll before. They watched a video, and in that video, they watched an adult, and the adult either played nicely, doing something else, or the adult was very aggressive to the Bobo doll. Then the researchers put the kid inside the room with the Bobo doll. If the child watched an adult being violent towards the Bobo doll, guess what? The kid was also violent towards the Bobo doll. However, if the adult was not violent towards the Bobo doll, the kid was much less likely to act aggressively towards the Bobo doll. So why do we aggress? Well, frustration aggression has something to do with it, sure. But there does seem to be some social learning that's involved as well. We tend to watch and observe how we should act, even in terms of aggression. We need to talk about the weapons effect. The weapons effect is very simple. It is that if there is a weapon present, people are going to act more aggressively. That doesn't mean that, so what that means is that if I put you in a room and there's a gun on the table, you're going to act more aggressively. I'm not saying that you are going to pick up the gun and shoot me. What I'm saying is that the presence of a weapon leads to more aggression in people. That's it. Just the presence of the weapon leads to more aggression. Now, perhaps this is because we're priming the idea of aggressiveness when you see a weapon, right? Because a gun, for example, has as part of its schema ideas of aggression. How do we reduce it? Well, effective punishments of aggression is only when the punishment is prompt and certain. Meaning, if you're going to punish somebody, you got to make sure that you punish them immediately after they do what was wrong, and they've got to make sure that they're punished like every time. If you don't do that, then it's like speeding, right? A lot of you probably speed when you drive, and a lot of you have probably gotten a ticket, but you don't get a ticket every time you speed. It needs to be certain and prompt if it's going to be effective. Let's talk about catharsis. Catharsis is when people say, get it out of your system. Go and just punch something until you feel better. Well, it turns out that catharsis is not a very good way to get rid of aggression. In fact, studies have found that by actually acting out aggression, even though it's not on the person that you feel frustrated with, acting out aggression on something else actually can prime you with more aggression, lead to more aggressive thoughts and behaviors instead of letting it out of your system and making you less aggressive. distracting yourself from the anger does tend to help. So if you're feeling angry and you need to go for a run in order to distract yourself, then that would be okay. But trying to physically take it out on somebody, that's catharsis. Take it out on something else, that's catharsis. Using the energy to distract you from the anger, that's a different issue. That's not catharsis. That is using your anger to using your energy to distract yourself and not be aggressive. Communication and negotiation are just much more effective at getting things done than aggression. So the more effective you are at communicating and negotiating, the less likely you are to resort to aggressive. When you can build empathy, you can also act more pro-socially and be less aggressive towards other people. So if you can put yourself in their point of view, mentally or emotionally, then you're much less likely to be aggressive. So why are we aggressive? Is it innate? Well, Freud thought it was. Freud had the idea of a death instinct. Lorenz in the 1960s felt that there was a fighting instinct, the idea that at least males had an instinct to fight because they were more likely to be able to mate and pass on their genes if they can fight other males away. Now, Freud, for example, does not have very much evidence that we have this death instinct that makes us act aggressively. And we got to be careful with this idea of an instinct as well. So let's give you an example. There's a famous study where they actually put a cat and a mouse and a rat in the same cage together. Now, from birth. So the cat and the rat grew up together. And what they found is that the cat and the rat got along fine. The cat did not kill the rat. In fact, when the cat was put into a room with other rats, the cat also did not kill those rats. So is it always the case that you're going to act on an instinct of aggression? Well, clearly that's not the case. I'm not saying that cats don't have any instincts to chase or catch rats. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that that's not always the case. It's not always part of their behavior to act instinctively aggressively. And I certainly don't think that's the case for humans either. All right, let's go ahead and stop there.